This video is part of the GRESB Assessment Training Program. It will cover how to complete the Fund Assessment Management component using the GRESB Assessment Portal. This lesson is the second part of the training on the Fund Assessment Management component and covers the aspects reporting, risk management, and stakeholder engagement. For training covering the introduction to the fund management component and the aspects leadership and policies, see the Fund Assessment Management component, Part 1. In this lesson, we'll go through indicators aspect by aspect, providing guidance and examples on how to report on each indicator in the assessment portal. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to complete the management component of the infrastructure fund assessment. After this lesson, we recommend that you follow the lesson on fund assessment performance components. The third aspect of the management component is reporting. The intent of this aspect is to assess the entity's approach to ESG reporting and disclosure. Let's have a look at the indicator on ESG reporting. This indicator asks, does the entity disclose its ESG actions and/or performance? If yes is selected, a number of different disclosure methods or reporting types appear in the selection list. Participants can upload everything from an ESG section in their annual report to a separately issued sustainability report to an integrated report which is aligned with the International Integrated Reporting Council framework. Note that while participants can select multiple options, the same uploaded document cannot be used to support more than one answer option. For example, the evidence to support section in annual report cannot also be provided for the standalone sustainability report. Let's now look at an example of selecting section in annual report. When this option is selected, a number of additional fields appear. Select the fields that relate specifically to that disclosure method and be sure they are corroborated by the uploaded evidence. First, you will need to select the applicable reporting level of the disclosure method. If the scope of the reporting in the annual report discloses actions or performance that are in direct reference to or match the reporting entity can be selected. For example, an annual report that is solely applicable to the entity, or which includes specific and detailed actions or performance of the entity in addition to other entities within the group of companies. Note that if the entity subject to that particular GRESB submission is in itself a group of entities, participants may select entity in this section. An example would be a listed company composed of multiple fully owned subsidiaries. So, if the GRESB submission is done at the consolidated level and the annual report covers the entire group of entities, you can conclude that the report is applicable to the entity reporting to GRESB, and an entity can be selected for this disclosure method. Groups should be selected if the scope of the reporting in the annual report includes the entity subject to the GRESB submission, but for example, does not have specific and detailed actions or performance of the entity itself, rather only for the larger group of companies as an aggregate. Investment manager or business unit should be selected if the scope of the reporting, like annual report, includes the entity subject to the GRESB submission. For example, an annual report which does not include specific and detailed actions or performance of the entity itself, but rather only for the investment manager as an aggregate. Next, you can select whether the section in annual report is aligned with a relevant reporting standard or guideline, such as GRI or PRI. The report must clearly and directly reference the reporting standard selected. If the report is not aligned, simply leave the selection on the text "Choose one." Lastly, you can select if the disclosure is third-party reviewed. If it is, you will select whether it was checked, verified, or assured. If the report is verified or assured, select the applicable standard from the drop-down menu. The formal assurance or verification statement must corroborate the scheme that is selected. It can be included within the report or provided as a separate evidence upload. Reporting year is one of the most important elements of RP1 and varies depending on the disclosure method selected. An integrated report must reference actions and/or performance from 2020, 2019, or 2018 for a company reporting on calendar year. The standalone sustainability report must reference actions and/or performance from the reporting year or the year prior. Consequently, disclosure referencing 2020 or 2019 is valid for a company reporting on calendar year. Section and annual reports must refer to actions and/or performance from the reporting year. For example, for an entity reporting on calendar year 2020, the annual report must cover the year January through December 2020. Disclosures published in 2021 referencing 2020 actions and/or performance are also valid. An annual report relating to calendar year 2019 is not valid unless you explicitly note that the 2020 annual report has not yet been published. This can be done using the GRESB evidence cover page or the evidence open text box. Dedicated section on corporate website as well as the disclosure methods section and entity reporting to investors and other must reference 2020. All of the required elements of the evidence uploads and different disclosure methods are explained in detail in the Infrastructure Fund Reference Guide. We highly recommend familiarizing yourself with the requirements prior to completing this indicator and keeping the reference guide at hand while reporting. The next indicator covers incident reporting. It asks, does the entity have a process to monitor and communicate ESG-related controversies, misconduct, penalties, incidents, accidents, or breaches against the codes of conduct or ethics? Select the stakeholders that the process requires communication with and describe the communication process. This indicator is automatically validated based on the stakeholders selected. Communicating with more stakeholders earns more points, subject to a diminishing increase in scoring. See the validation and scoring lesson for more details. The description of the communication process is not scored. The next indicator follows the last by asking to report on actual incident occurrences, the intent being to ensure the communication of significant incidents to the entity's investors. If one or more incidents have occurred during the reporting year, enter the total number of incident cases, the value of any fines and/or penalties, and the total number of currently pending investigations. This indicator is not scored, but is of significant interest to investors. GRESB may use the information in this indicator as criteria for the recognition of sector leaders. The fourth aspect of the management component is risk management. The intent of this aspect is to assess the entity's understanding and mitigation of material ESG risks and identification of opportunities in its investment processes. This indicator assesses the entity's use of an ESG due diligence process to evaluate risks and opportunities of potential investments. The integration of ESG policies may assist in reducing risk and identifying opportunities for improved ESG performance. Select the applicable elements and provide supporting evidence. This indicator is subject to manual validation, and the evidence provided of the risk assessment process will be assessed based on A, whether it identifies ESG risks and opportunities, B, whether it analyzes these ESG risks and opportunities, C, whether the ESG risks and opportunities are evaluated and addressed, and D, whether it demonstrates how the ESG risks and opportunities that are identified impact investment decisions. Please read the Fund Assessment Reference Guide on this indicator carefully to understand the details of each of these four validation criteria fully. Points are earned for each element of the process selected and shown to be applied. This indicator assesses whether the entity formally addresses ESG risks and/or opportunities in its investment monitoring and asset management processes. It also covers communication of these ESG risks and opportunities to relevant stakeholders. Select the elements of the investment monitoring process that include ESG factors. If externally report or communicate ESG risks and/or opportunities is selected, you will be prompted to indicate which stakeholders this applies to. Next, you will need to fill in the open text box for each element selected. Within each text box, it is necessary to identify which specific ESG risks and/or opportunities are addressed, indicate how they are addressed, and indicate which tools are used. Please note that evidence is mandatory for this indicator and must demonstrate support for the processes selected and statements made in the open text box. And if selecting externally report or communicate, the evidence must also highlight sections indicating stakeholders to whom the risks are communicated. The final aspect of the management component is stakeholder engagement. Improving the sustainability performance of infrastructure assets requires dedicated resources, a commitment from senior management, and tools for measurement or management of resource consumption. It also requires the cooperation of other stakeholders, including employees and suppliers. This aspect identifies actions taken to engage with those stakeholders, as well as the nature of this engagement. The intent of the first indicator in this aspect is to assess the existence, scope, and reach of the entity's employee engagement program. Effective employee engagement programs are often critical in preventing or addressing controversy that may create regulatory risks, legal liabilities, or undermining the entity's social license to operate, and which maximize opportunities for creating shared value. Select the different elements of the employee engagement programs that apply. This indicator is new and does not require evidence, nor is it scored. The intent of the next indicator is to examine the types and content of training received by employees responsible for this entity. A more skilled and aware workforce enhances the entity's human capital and may help to improve employee satisfaction. Employee training and development contribute to improved business performance. If selecting yes to this indicator, the entity must be able to provide percentage values of employees who received professional training versus those who specifically received ESG training. You must then indicate which ESG pillars are covered by the training. This indicator is new and does not require evidence, nor is it scored. The intent of the next indicator is to examine whether and to what extent the entity engages with employees regarding their satisfaction. Employee satisfaction surveys help entities to understand critical issues within the business, engage with their staff, and to increase employee satisfaction, which may contribute to improved retention rates and overall productivity. Using widely applied employee satisfaction surveys should be translated into easily interpretable metrics that can help analyze and compare outcomes, despite the many variations between departments and teams. If selecting yes for this indicator, the entity must be able to provide the percentage of employees covered by the satisfaction survey and the survey response rate. This indicator is new and does not require evidence, nor is it scored. The final indicator in the stakeholder engagement aspect looks to identify the metrics used by the entity to monitor diversity in governance and at the workforce level. Diversity in boards of directors has become a clear priority for investors and is considered to positively impact investment decisions and increase organizational competitiveness. The indicator is split into two subsections, namely diversity of governance bodies and diversity of the organization's employees. This is the only indicator within this aspect that is scored. In order to earn points, the participant must provide the gender ratios for the group they have selected. This is the only metric that is scored. As can be seen in this slide, if the participant selects gender ratio, they will be prompted to provide the percentage of women versus men. And in this slide, if the participant selects diversity of organization's employees, they can select the metrics of age group distribution and gender ratio if applicable, but only gender ratio will earn points. Percentage of women versus men must also be provided. Thank you for taking the time to complete this lesson. We hope that it helped you get a better understanding of the GRESB Infrastructure Fund assessment and prepared you to complete the assessment accurately. For any questions, you can contact us at gresb.com/contact.